Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to part 6 of our 7-part series on the sacraments of the Catholic Church. As we've said all along, these little talks last approximately half an hour, just cover some key points on each of the 7 sacraments. They are not intended to be an extended commentary on each of these 7 sacraments. If you want to do that, I'd encourage you to get a hold of the Catechism or do some reading in other reputable sources that can go deeper than we're able to do in a short little program. We try to highlight some points that perhaps you learned when you were very young, maybe grade school or high school, and have forgotten, or some points that maybe you never learned at all and just need to be introduced to those points and come to understand them, and hopefully all this helps you live your faith on a deeper level. Tonight we covered the interesting topic of marriage, and as I always do in these sessions, and I think they've been well received, I cover kind of the thorny questions. And boy, that won't be hard to come up with thorny questions on the sacrament of marriage. Dave Rajewski, who runs our RCA program, and Renee and Sean Zeal will cover the theology of the issue, and then I will cover the thorny questions and practical sides of the issue. So all of our talks are important. They all have something to offer on this interesting topic of marriage. Jesus never did a wedding and only spoke rarely about marriage. That's interesting. Church teaching has a lot to say about marriage, but the scriptural commentary on marriage is rather sparse. So we have a lot of work to do. So Dave, if you want to start off, and then the Zeals will take over, and I will close our program. David, if you would, please.
Okay. Today, as I usually do with the talks on the sacraments, we're going to go over 5 things to know about the sacrament of marriage. And the first thing to say sounds a little obvious, but sometimes we need to remember, for Catholics, matrimony is a sacrament. Frequently when Catholics talk about marriage, it can seem like a long list of rules and regulations. Why can't the priest come to the beach? I need a dispensation for this or that. What are you talking about, a dispensation? The rules can go on, and we can lose sight of the fact that for Catholics, first and foremost, marriage is a sacrament. For Protestants, marriage is an important event, and God is certainly a part of it, but it is not a sacrament. For Catholics of the Latin and the Eastern Rite, it is a sacrament, and this is true for the Orthodox as well. That it's a special encounter that the couple has with God at this important phase in their life. As a sacrament, it is an encounter of Jesus Christ and the spouses that begins on their wedding day, and it unfolds through the rest of their life. Marriage, like baptism, occurs at one event. There's a ceremony for marriage. But the living out of the sacrament is an important aspect of this sacrament, just as it is for baptism. When we take on the mission of Christ, we live that mission out every day in our life. Well, it's an important part of marriage. The couple will live the rest of their lives in light of the sacrament of matrimony. There are a number of references to marriage in the Bible, and they can tell us something about this sacrament and what Catholics believe about this sacrament. If we go back to the very beginning of Genesis, Adam and Eve, talk a little bit about marriage. The man is in the garden, and life is wonderful, and he's got all of the animals, and he names them all, but he's not content and not complete until God presents him with Eve, about whom he says, finally, this one is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. So there is that special bond between man and woman that we see stressed in the sacrament of marriage. In the New Testament, Jesus' first miracle takes place at the wedding feast at Cana. So obviously marriage was a part of Jewish life, an important part of Jewish life, and something that Jesus celebrated. His first miracle goes to help the couple celebrate their life together. When Jesus talks about himself in the Gospels, He frequently refers to himself as the bridegroom when he talks about his relationship with his disciples. The other day we just heard the reading about fasting in Matthew's gospel, that Jesus' disciples didn't fast. And his response was, how could they fast when the bridegroom is with them? So this emphasis of himself as the bridegroom shows that marriage is a metaphor that he uses to talk about his relationship with the church. One of the teachings that Catholics hold to with regard to marriage comes directly from Jesus when he said, whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. So it sort of defined what the marriage relationship is, that it is lifelong and that it's entered into seriously as a covenant. And then finally, the last biblical reference that I want to touch on is the one from Ephesians, where the writer says, wives, submit to your husbands. On the surface, this sort of sounds like the opening for World War III. However, if you read the rest of that section of the letter, it talks about submitting to each other as Christ gave himself to the church. So that gift of one to the other is total and complete. That's the model that they're to follow. All right, our third point. The spouses themselves are the ministers of the sacrament of matrimony. That takes a little bit of thinking, because sometimes we assume, well, the priest is there, so he's, of course, the minister of the sacrament of matrimony. When we read the accounts in the newspaper about a couple who's been married, Father so-and-so married the couple. Well, actually, the couple married themselves. Father was there to perform the ceremony and to serve as a witness. The Catechism of the Catholic Church states, the spouses, as ministers of Christ's grace, mutually confer upon each other the sacrament of matrimony by expressing their consent before the church. The priest presides over the ceremony, the rite of marriage, and he performs the rite, but the marriage itself is performed by the couple. The priest also represents the church, witnessing the exchange of vows that the couple takes. Our fourth point, the sacrament of matrimony for Catholics is an icon of the relationship between Christ and his church. The self-giving of Jesus to his church is to be reflected in the lives of the married couple, especially for children. How do they learn about the love God has for them and what it means? They learn about it in the context of their family, and they see their parents living it out. That incendiary passage from Ephesians, it sounds like it should, be very, very disruptive, but again, it talks to the husband and wife and it asks them to treat each other in the way that God treats us. God held nothing back. He gave his only son to save us. And so in the marriage contract, we see reflected this love of God for his church in the love that the husband and the wife have for each other. The other point about this, the matrimony being an icon of the relationship of God and his church, is that while marriage is all about the couple and the family that they have, there's always an aspect of the community that we see in the sacraments. And so married couples mirror that love of God for his church to the rest of us in the Christian community. They serve as a reminder for us of how God loves us. And they call on us to deepen our relationship with Jesus as they deepen their relationship with him and each other. And the last point, the sacrament of marriage isn't for everyone. And on the surface, that sounds kind of harsh, but let me explain. There are when a couple presents themselves to be married, to receive the sacrament of marriage, they come with certain expectations that have to be met. Most importantly, they have to be able to give full and free consent. So marriage is a sacrament not for children but adults, because children can't give that kind of consent. The couple really needs to know each other and to know what they're getting into. People who are open to children are available for marriage. Our relationship with Christ is life-giving, so too should married life be life-giving. And so there is a presumption that the couple will be open to children in their marriage. And this leads us to the concern with annulments. There is no Catholic divorce, all right? An annulment is a legal recognition that something about that marriage was invalid. For example, in a shotgun wedding, can the two individuals involved really be giving full and free consent if someone is threatening their very life? If you end up finding out that you're the fifth wife or husband of a bigamist and you didn't know about the other four spouses at the time you got married, are you really giving full and free consent to the sacrament with the person who you exchanged vows with? So an annulment isn't a divorce, it's a recognition that there was something missing in that marriage that invalidates it. Okay, so our 5 points: marriage is a sacrament. There are references in the Bible that help us to explain, but as Father said, a lot of church teaching talks about what Catholics believe about marriage. The spouses themselves are the ministers of the sacrament, and the sacrament of marriage is an icon of the relationship between Christ and his church, and it does bring some requirements. Okay, I'll turn it over to the Zeals.
Thank you, Dave, so much.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you, Father Ed. When Father Ed said a few moments ago that the Zeals are here to share the theology of the sacrament of marriage, that made me a little nervous, and I think it did Sean as well. What we can share with you is our lived experience and what it's meant to us for the past 25 years to celebrate that sacrament from May 20th, 1995 to this present moment, which will be our 26th year that we're married. I think what's important to remember that a sacrament, as many of us were taught when we were younger, is that outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. I think so many of us remember that and what that means. And I think as we get, as we continue to live on, as we get older, we realize what that means, that it is something that is pretty powerful and pretty significant. The part about grace, instituted to give grace, when you realize that grace can be part of your marriage, should be part of your marriage, should be part of the sacrament, that you have to have that, pray for that every day, I think that's what enables you to endure some of the challenges that you may face over time. So there's a few things that we just wanted to share when we were asked to talk to everybody about, what does it mean to us? What does the sacrament of marriage mean? And I think Sean's going to start.
Yeah, we spend our lives trying to be good at our jobs. And why would we think that just because we share a deep love and care and concern for our spouse, that would be sufficient preparation that will last through the challenges and struggles that every couple encounter? We need to prepare, and preparing us to receive the sacrament helps us to understand how to live out this sacrament. Marriage preparation serves as a foundation for the marriage, and just like a building, the foundation is critical to the strength of the marriage and the ability to withstand the force and any deterioration that would come through time. Accepting that there are three in the marriage, husband, wife, and God, helps us to completely understand the concept of when two or more are gathered, there is love. It's His infinite love that helps us to recognize God's presence in our marriage, and we remember that the wedding is more than just a day. The marriage is a lifetime, and we prepare ourselves going into this union and what it truly means. Then we will have such a deep relationship with our spouse, with God, and with our parish community that is something that is truly incredible.
So one of the concepts when Sean just mentioned about God being present in our marriage, if you think about God as life-giving, and that's something that you need to be in a marriage. You need to be life-giving. And that's not always easy. It sounds like it might be, but there are times when it isn't. And it's something that every day you have to make that decision to love. And it could be something as simple as you get aggravated by some pet peeve that you may have or the other person may have, and you have to stop in that moment and you find the grace to do that, because if God is part of that union and you realize that God brought you together, that you can be life-giving in that moment. It's not about a compromise. Sometimes you'll hear people say that you have to give up who you are and that other person gives up who they are. It's more about, it's beyond a compromise. It's a deeper level. It's about being life-giving in that moment and saying, I'm going to sacrifice something for this person and for this union, and that's going to be much stronger and much richer and result in a much richer relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Another important thing that kind of Renee touched on, it goes hand in hand, is that in order to increase the depth of our marriage is making a decision to love. Every day, saying it, doesn't mean that I have to, that I don't love my partner every day. What it means is that in those moments, I have to make a conscious and calculated decision that this is the person that I've chosen, and this is the love I have for that person. And it helps to avoid those major blowouts that people have and will have. I just have to kind of think about it and kind of put it back there, and it's not an easy thing. It's work. This is what we are here to say is that this is something that shouldn't be taken lightly, and you need to. It's like anything else. If you want to get good at it, you have to put in the time, and there's certainly we've put in the 10,000 hours for sure.
So I read something the other day that Pope Francis was quoted as saying. It was with respect to our prayer and give us this day our daily bread. And what Pope Francis said for couples should pray, say, give us this day our daily love. Because love is the bread of life. Love nourishes the couples. And so it kind of stuck with me. I was like, that's something simple that we can do, that I can say often in those moments too, when we were walking in here and it was a little icy, and someone walked ahead of me, and I just said, you're not going to wait for me? And it was more about, we're doing this thing together. Oops, yes, in that moment, I need to remember where his focus is, where my focus is, and who we are and why we're here. So it's just simple things, but in those moments, say, yes, give us this day our daily love, and help us and help be present in our marriage.
One of the really cool things about the sacrament is that it's the only sacrament that you get to share with another person together, and you live it out for all to see. And we take the vows that we recited on the day of our wedding. We take those vows very seriously, and we believe that. As part of those vows, we made a vow not only to ourselves but to our church and the church community, and that in doing so, we will continue to show that outward sign, and if it's speaking to young people who are in an RCIA program about marriage, doing a program like this, or participating in Engaged Encounter in marriage prep. We feel it's important, and that's how we live the sacrament. That's our outward sign. But it also incorporates our family. We started the family. We when we were married, that was the inception of the Zeal family, and then we started to cultivate that family by having our children, and we feel it's important as part of our sacrament to be an example to our children, as our parents were examples to us in showing us how they live their faith through their marriage.
We both are very blessed that we have two sets of parents who have had, both are married for over 50 years and have had incredible relationships despite many obstacles and many challenges that they had both experienced in their lives. And that's been an example for us. Not everybody has that. We know we're blessed to have that. But even in this parish community, when we come to Mass and we see so many different couples, whether they are just married, whether they've been married like us for a bunch of years, or whether they're 50 or 55 or 60 plus years of marriage, you get to see that sacrament being lived out as they receive the Eucharist together, as they are here celebrating Mass as part of this parish community. And so that's why that 2x2 concept and living out that sacrament of marriage is something that's shared. And you have a responsibility receiving that sacrament to share it with others. Now, we didn't get that in the first several years as we're trying to figure out who we are, and then when we had children and figure out how we're raising our children, which may be differently at times and different things. But over time, you realize that, wow, you do have that responsibility, and we do need to become involved in our parish community, because it helps us in our sacrament to get to that deeper level of realizing that sacrament, as well as to be witness to others.
Yeah, it's akin to planting a garden. You start out and you want to make sure that you have the best place that you're gonna plant this garden. You're gonna want to make sure you have the best soil, and then you plant your seeds, and you can't just walk away. You have to make sure that you water those seeds every day. You protect those seeds. You make sure that the environment around it isn't going to diminish the garden. And then as the seeds start to sprout, you still have to continue to tender the garden and give it care. And that's what we believe the sacrament is for us. And because if you don't get rid of the weeds, and if you don't fertilize, and if you don't do the best preparation for that garden, it's not going to yield the fruit that you want it to. And just like in a marriage, if you allow the distractions, which will be the weeds and the thing, there are going to be events that happen, and if you don't protect yourself or protect that, then you're not going to get the fruit that you want. We certainly are not experts in no means. We have, like Renee said, we have 25 years experience, and the road wasn't easy. But as I said before, if you want something, and if you're trying to achieve, something, you have to work at it. You can't just, set it and forget it. That's not what this is. This is a marriage is something that you certainly have to work at every day, and we do. And you're not in it alone. We have a parish community. We have people around us that support and love us, and we see that, and we try to reciprocate that in all that we do.
And so that's what we have to share. Be life-giving. Make a decision to love, understand the true blessing that the sacrament is, live it and experience it, and it will be something incredible.
You, both the Zeals and Dave have offered a great deal to think about and pray about, and I probably don't need to say much more. And I'm edified by their talks. Sean and Renee are holy people. They'd be holy people whether they were married or not. Perhaps they were attracted to each other in part because they saw holiness in the other person long before they were married. And that's one of the reasons why this sacrament is in trouble. The sacrament is in trouble. And I'd be lying if all the thorny questions I'm going to talk about, I'm only going to talk about a couple, but they all kind of, like if you want to try to synthesize all these series talks that we've been given, I think they both mentioned that, Father Edwards doesn't marry you. I haven't married anybody. I witnessed the marriage. They chose, Sean and Renee chose to marry each other. Now, on our talk on baptism, which was, 6 weeks ago now, when we meet with our couples, hopefully they're couples having their baby baptized. Very often today, they are not married. In fact, usually today, they are not married. Ideally, they would have experienced the sacrament of marriage, which, as a result of their love for each other, would create this child. Unfortunately, very often sitting in front of us in our baptismal preparation class, we have a couple who maybe, ought not to be married, and they know they ought not to be married, and I know they ought not to be married. And that's all some of the difficulties we have with this sacrament today. I don't tell that couple. I tell that couple, in an ideal world, you would be married, but I don't know if you two are there yet. Maybe someday you will be. These are very difficult questions we're talking about, and Dave covered a lot of heavy stuff too. So very interesting. I hope people watching this are sharing it with their children or friends and say, okay, let's discuss what that sacrament means. So I'm going to cover 3 particular issues or thorny questions. And the first might be the most important of all the talks we've had in this 7-part series, of which tonight is number 6. Why do we have to get married in the church? I want to get married over at the public park. Or I want to get married down at Punta Cana on the beach, at Sunset Beach. And let me tell you something, those who've never been to Punta Cana, if you want to see weddings, go to Punta Cana. They're going on round the clock. And that would be a legal marriage. That would be a legal marriage, yes it would. If, God forbid, one of those spouses would die tomorrow, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm assuming the other person would be the legal heir to the goods of that person. That is true. That is not a valid marriage, getting married at the beach by some, who knows, or out at the park, or up in the boon of the fire truck, because somebody's a firefighter, they wanted to get married in some place that means a lot to him, but they really don't want anything to do with church. And people are, I would think it a very safe guess that more people get married outside of church, of whatever religion or synagogue, than get married in church. And that is reflective to a degree of the diminishing or diminished impact the church has on young people today. Those two go hand in hand. Why do I have to get married in church? We have a nicer thing somewhere else. Well, if you listen to what these guys have talked about, this is a sacred event. The park is beautiful, and I think the park is sacred too, but this is God's house. And we believe that sacred things happen in sacred places. So that the sacred, which I think we thirst for, and I hope we thirst for, I think every soul thirsts for, I want to share that before God to ask His presence in our marriage. That's why it's a sacrament, as the Zeals were saying, where we find God's grace. It's not just a social event, though there's a social component. And it's more than just a legal event, though there is a legal marriage license. It's so much more than that. Now, having said that, let me say this. It is possible, going forward, that our bishops may say, we have to try to meet the people where they're at. And I'm not sure what's going to happen. I'm sure if we lived at Ocean City, Maryland, we live here in snowy northeastern Pennsylvania, the bishop might allow that somehow we can try to reach people where they're at, because young people are not where we want them to be. They do not understand, in many cases, what the Zeals were talking about. Maybe 20 years after marriage, they will. Recently, just within the last year, the bishop of this diocese, Bishop Bambera, allowed an exception to that rule. We had a young lady who was dying of cancer or some other terrible disease, and she would not have been able to get as far as her church. That's how seriously ill she was. Her father happens to be a pretty good friend of mine, grew up playing ball with him. And the bishop allowed an exception to the rule, and the wedding, I think, was in her backyard, because that's about as far as she could go to get her by. She was in a wheelchair, I'm sure. And that young lady tragically died, not unexpected. It was expected that she was not going to live long. So that rule could be worked around, but I'm deeply concerned in the average case. That's an exceptional case. Has that couple that's getting married at the beach had any marriage preparation at all to understand what the zeals were talking about? Preparation that makes them look at things that maybe they're not ready to look at yet or have not even considered, like children, raising the children in the faith, and deeper issues like that, so that someday they would have the 25 years of marriage that this couple has. I'm afraid that that couple getting married at the beach has received precious little preparation. Marriage is hard enough if you have good preparation. And I have a moral responsibility to provide that for that couple. I'm afraid some of those couples just getting married wherever they want to get nothing. And I very much believe that that slip will show a few years down the road. So it's a sacred event. We do it in sacred places to feel the sacred in God's presence. Second question I often get, well, Father, I'd like to get married in church, but we can't afford a big fancy wedding. This is a big church. Maybe you could have a big fancy wedding here that costs $50,000 or more. And the answer is, you don't have to. You could get married here for nothing. Zero. I guess the marriage license at the courthouse costs $40 or $50 or something. I can't do anything about that, but other than that, you can have a very beautiful wedding here for nothing. In fact, I would like to be part of more of those weddings. Recently, because of the COVID and a sickness, I get involved in a lot of weddings with sickness, it seems. I had a young lady who I taught at Holy Cross High School some years back who had to postpone her wedding once because of her illness. She was very seriously sick, and then second because of the COVID. And she called me up and said, Father, we just want to be married. I love this man. We just want to get married. There were 10 people, which at that time, maybe it was May, that was the maximum number of people allowed in a church at the time. I believe, now I've done 600 weddings, that it was the most beautiful wedding I've ever seen. There were no flowers. There was no big crowd. There was no cameras in my face. But you could feel the love between that couple. If you want to get married and think, I can't afford it, you don't have, talk to me tomorrow. We can work it out. Putting on a wedding is like having another job. That's what it's become. I don't think that's what Jesus had in mind. I don't think those things are all distractions. And finally, people often say, I'm not sure if I can get married in the church. I had a couple years ago, this is an anecdotal story, but it's true. Somebody had been married in Vegas, like when they were 25 or something, one of those kind of weddings. And then they got divorced and married another person, and they were very happily married for like 40 years, we'll say. And that marriage had nothing to do with the church and was never blessed by the church. The Vegas wedding is rarely going to be blessed by the church. And they had an ideal marriage, but they had not come up to receive communion. And at one point, I had enough courage to say, why don't you guys receive communion? You seem to be an ideal couple. Well, I had a previous marriage. And I said, that's not a valid marriage. You don't need an annulment, which, if you need an annulment, call me. But they didn't need an annulment. They didn't even recognize that fact. There's so many misunderstandings, and Dave tried to touch on that. If you have any question of can I get married or what would be needed for me to get, just call your parish priest. Call me and we'll explain, do you need an annulment? If you do need an annulment, what will be involved in that? If you don't, we'll get you married as soon as possible. If it's a good idea for you two to be married. That's the greater question. I like to think if you come to the church has a moral responsibility to give you excellent marriage preparation. And you should ask nothing less so that you can have what the zeals obviously have, and you should want nothing less. So call your priest here for everyone. Do I need this? What do I have to do? Just let us know. We will work with you. I have never met a couple I could not help. And I've been a priest a long time. So this is an important program tonight on marriage, and it involves a lot of details. Who, when, where, what it means. It's a complicated sacrament. It's not all the way, where our filmer is filming right now, I see grown men cry, big tough guys, when they have to give their daughter away. And that man knows that he will no longer be the leading man in her life. It's such a powerful sacrament when done properly and celebrated with both grace and love. Some of my favorite events are weddings. And some of my greatest things I see are the love of a good family and children. It's wonderful, wonderful, if done properly. Never be afraid to call and ask for help. Well, this concludes part 6 of our series. Next week will be on the Sacrament of the Sick. That will conclude the series, and we hope you found them somewhat enjoyable. And we get pretty good viewership, and so they're meeting a need for some people. Thank you very much, and have a good evening, everybody.